Good morning. In his play, The Cocktail Party, T.S. Eliot captures a fundamental truth about human nature and the source of much of the hurt in the world. Many of his works actually elicit this kind of sarcastic interpretation of people of his time. The interesting thing is that what T.S. Eliot wrote almost 75 years ago, or actually a little better than 75 years ago, it still applies to today. I've found that people's actions are rarely driven by outright malice and an intent to harm others, but rather they are more driven by their own selfish desires, right? Do we know people like that in our lives? Okay, I'm glad to hear that the chuckles. I'm not the only one that knows people like that. I've also found that this can lead to deep and unintended wounds for those around them, right? Yes? No? Okay, all right. Just checking. I like to say that one of my favorite phrases is hurt, people, right? Anybody who's been hurt in their lives has a tendency to hurt other people because of the hurt that they've experienced. Where Eliot may fall short, though, is in suggesting that people simply don't care. I don't think that's the case. While there are many who do not care about what they do to harm other people, I think there's just as many people who do hurt others out of their own fear and pain. And they're simply unaware of the hurt that they cause to others. In the portion of the drama that unfolds in this play that I mentioned from T.S. Eliot, it actually happens in the third act, and it's during a pivotal conversation between two characters. One by the name of Sir Henry Harcourt Riley, who is a psychiatrist, and the other is Edward Chamberlain, whose marriage and moral life are unraveling around him. And the psychiatrist Riley says, half the harm that is done in this world is due to people who want to feel important. They don't mean to do harm, but the harm does not interest them. Or they do not see it, or they justify it because they are absorbed in the endless struggle to think well of themselves. Now, that's a lot of words to say what I just said very simply. Hurt people, right? Now, this is a moment when Eliot shifts the play from social comedy into more of a spiritual diagnosis. And those of you who know or are familiar with T.S. Eliot know that he had a conversion experience. He was raised as an... I can't think of the word for it now. He didn't have any faith or beliefs. He wasn't raised in the church, but became a Christian later in life. He wasn't necessarily an atheist. Agnostic, thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. That's the word I'm looking for. He was agnostic. He didn't know what he believed, but then suddenly had a conversion experience later in life. And he writes a lot of his poems and his plays around that conversion. Now, this is the moment when that shift happens for him to change to a spiritual diagnosis. You see, this character, Edward Chamberlain, has come to the psychiatrist Riley seeking help. But what he really wants is reassurance. He wants a way to feel better about himself without changing anything about himself. Sound like anybody you know? Here, though, it is in this moment that Riley refuses to give him that comfort, and instead he exposes the deeper spiritual illness beneath Edward's polite, respectable exterior. It's in this context that Riley delivers the lines that I read a few moments ago. Now, the interesting thing is not that it's a general philosophical musing either. It's a direct diagnosis of Edward's and many other people's self-deception, and by extension, ours. That was an ouch moment for me this week as I digested this portion of the play. Here's the thing. This is not a new concept for us in the 21st century, nor was it a new concept in the 20th century either. As a general rule, the human condition of wanting to be important and to feel more important has been happening for thousands of years. Everybody with me so far? If we look at what we've studied so far this summer, we can really see this particular diagnosis playing out in many of the interactions we've heard about. I mean, the Abrahamic family line is rife with this kind of wanting to feel better about themselves and to make themselves look better. If you look at Abram and Sarai, when they were in Egypt, Abram told Sarai to pretend that she was his sister so that neither one of them would be killed. Then you have Isaac and Rebekah doing much the same thing to protect Rebekah, at least one time that we know of. And then their sons, Isaac and Rebekah's sons, Esau and Jacob, are fighting before they ever leave the womb, right? Jacob comes out holding on to the heel of his brother because he wants to be as important as his brother. In fact, it's Jacob who sells or convinces his father to give him the blessing and inheritance that his brother Esau deserved. And now we have the sons of Jacob doing things to make sure that the elder sons get what they deserve as well. Sounds like a discontented family to me, right? Talk about dysfunctional. I'm sure none of us know any families like that at all. Right? Yeah, that's what I thought. We now have come to the last of the family stories that we will digest this summer in that Abrahamic line. And so I wonder, what is the first thing you think of when you hear about Joseph and think about Joseph's story? I bet for many of us it's his coat of many colors and the joy that comes from such a lavish gift from a parent. Maybe the story you remember is the one of his reconciliation with his brothers in Egypt after Joseph has provided a place for them to have security and food because of the famine. Maybe it's the more obscure story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. If you haven't heard that one, we'll have to talk about that later. It's a pretty good story. But I wonder how many of us really consider how much of a spoiled brat he was before he was sold into slavery. And this is not as likely as the others because I think the ones that I mentioned are talked about the most when we consider Joseph's life. For today, though, I want to challenge us to think differently about Joseph. To think of Joseph as a typical boy who has 10 older brothers. Who of us have older siblings? How many of you have had fights with your older siblings? Yeah. Now, he not only has 10 older brothers, he has one older sister, too. Now, you don't get to hear much about Dinah, but she's there. Now, layer on to the fact that Jacob clearly favors Joseph above all his other children, right? Joseph's the only one that gets this special gift of the long robe with the sleeves. How do you expect a child, and in this case, a precocious 17-year-old, to act in that case? How do you think he's going to act? Like a spoiled brat, right? Potentially, at least that's what most kids would be acting like. At a time when he was likely considered an adult by all other standards, Joseph is still treated like a child. And his brothers have not missed one iota how much Jacob gets favored over and above what they have even when they were his age. And I mean, here's these men, likely ranging in age from early 40s to mid-40s. They're all grown. They've taken responsibility for themselves and now their own families. Imagine how they might have felt. Maybe you don't need to imagine. Maybe you have younger siblings who seem to have gotten more favor than you did growing up. I'm hoping that no matter how much you were favored or your siblings were favored, your sibling or siblings was or were favored over you, that you never thought about throwing them into the pit and leaving them for dead. Okay, I hear a few chuckles. I'm hoping that means no, you never felt that way. But that's what we have before us today. Without kind of belaboring this part of the story, it's important for us to understand how Joseph acted as a young man. The brothers were jealous. They were angry at their father. They were angry at Joseph. And while we should probably place most of the blame for this upon Jacob's shoulders, they definitely had a choice, right? They had a choice about how they would respond to the way that Joseph was treated and the way Joseph acted, and also had a choice about how they treated him, right? They still had the choice. And yet here we are some 3,000 years later, and we're still treating people with disrespect without ever considering might be causing them to respond and react the way they do. Going back to the play I mentioned from T.S. Eliot, the point the psychiatrist character was trying to make is just this. We all get to choose how we act. We all get to choose how we act. And that's lesson 1 for today, to take away from today. And so I imagine another scene. Jacob and Joseph having a conversation after he has shared a very special time, a dream with his father. Imagine how excited Joseph might have been about experiencing this dream, having seen this very special scene in his mind. Now, this is not the first dream like it. After sharing his dream with his brothers, another reason for the brothers to have contempt for him, Joseph has this second dream in which he sees the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. And as he tells his father about being bowed down to, Jacob too becomes infuriated and rebukes him. If you think about it, though, who would not want to have a dream like this? I mean, who amongst us would not like to have a dream of others bowing down to them? Maybe, maybe not. I do not think that Joseph had developed his gift of interpretation at this point yet, to understand what it was that he was seeing. But he still had this dream. He was given a gift of dreams, as this is the second of several we have recorded over the next 14 or so chapters in Genesis. But consider what this means for Joseph, who is clearly a precocious 17-year-old. He is given these visions of what will happen in the future. He just doesn't know what to do with them yet. And who amongst us at the age of 17 knew what to do with things that we saw? Did we? No, right? None of us were mature enough at that point. So, we have to put it into perspective. Yes, Joseph is given this great power and great talent and gift, but he doesn't know what to do with it yet. And one thing to keep in mind is that Joseph has already reported on his brothers for their misbehavior at least once. And that landed his brothers in some serious hot trouble with their father Jacob, right? So much so that Jacob is now sending Joseph to go check on the brothers to make sure they're doing what they're doing. Can you imagine being put into that position? You have 10 older brothers and now you're going to check on them and report back to your father? How likely would you be to go check on your brothers? Not very likely, I'm guessing. And I can imagine that it would not sit well with any of us if we were the older sibling either, being checked on by our baby brother who is treated like a baby all the time. But our response would clearly indicate our character, wouldn't it? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of heads doing this. So when Jacob sends Joseph off to check on his brothers with his multicolored robe, it is not hard to see how this might anger those brothers just a little bit. And that leads us to the end of our story for today, at least for what we can cover in our time today. And also the lesson 2 to take away from this story. We are once again back in the dry, dusty fields where Jacob's flock is being tended by the 10 eldest brothers. And then off in the distance, they see this brightly colored frock coming towards them. The frock of their disdain coming over the hill. And for our purposes this morning, we are going to make the presumption that Joseph has no other intention than to check on his brothers and report back to his father. That being said, the brothers do something that is kind of off the wall, don't they? They gather together and conspire to kill Joseph. And not just throw him in the pit, but literally kill him. They want to kill him, cover his coat in blood, and take it back to their father and say he got killed by a wild animal. You guys remember that from the story? Yes, okay, good. Now, at least one of them, out of the 10, rethinks this plan and thinks, okay, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe this isn't the way to handle this situation in our baby brother. Maybe we need to do something different and not have the blood of their brother on their hands. And this is where Reuben is really concerned. Whether Reuben is really concerned about Joseph or not is kind of something that doesn't much matter, right? At least he has made a choice. He's developed a little bit of a conscience, so to speak. Instead, he wants to throw him in a pit. Well, okay. I'm not sure that's a much better choice, do you? I mean, at least by putting him in the pit, there's a chance that he might be rescued from that pit. And that was actually Reuben's intention, was to go back to his father and then come back and rescue Joseph when his brothers weren't there. These guys must have been so intimidating. I mean, each of the brothers by themselves were afraid of the rest. Imagine growing up like that. But he does develop a conscience, and he wants to throw him into a pit and leave him there. So they put him in this pit, and with some amount of irony, while they are calmly and quietly eating lunch off to the side, imagine that picture, they put their baby brother into a pit, and then they go off to eat lunch. They see a train of Ishmaelites coming, likely on their way to Egypt to trade the people they have accumulated in their journeys. In another irony of this story, as you will see in the next week or so, Joseph is traded by his jealous, infuriated brothers who do not want to give this kid any more reason to lord anything over them. He's traded and taken to Egypt, where he does become powerful enough to have them bow down to him at some point. There's two ironies here that I see, really. First is that it's another of the Abrahamic line that comes and rescues him out of the pit. Anybody recognize that name? Ishmael? Oh yeah, Ishmael. That's the son of Hagar and Abraham. And this is his descendants that have rescued Joseph out of the pit to take him into Egypt. These are the people that have taken him. And the second is that being in Egypt is where Joseph is able to make his vision, his dreams, a reality. Again, we'll talk about that more later, but there's two really big ironies when you think about it. It's part of his family that rescues him, even though it's his immediate family that throws him in the pit. And then it's because of this that his dreams do actually become a reality. Now, for us today, the second lesson is that no matter what we hold in our hearts, it's always better to be compassionate, kind, and caring toward others than it is to hold grudges. Yes? Whew. Now, I think this is something our current age needs to learn. Would you agree with me? The thing is that once we do something, it cannot be undone or changed. Right? We can say we're sorry, but that doesn't change what happened. We can try and take back what we have done, but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It happened. It's like once we say something, that cannot be taken back either. There's a Greek philosopher by the name of Heraclitus who once said, "You cannot step twice into the same river." The reason being, the river is always moving and is never the same, ever, after a moment you step into it. Life is much like that rolling river. We can never relive a day. We cannot go back and redo something we did, right? Life is forever moving and without a moment's rest. It behooves us then to give a good account of ourselves every moment of every day, right? If we give a good account of ourselves every moment of every day, I wonder if Jesus were to check on us each and every night and we had to account for our day, would we be able to do that and give a good account of our day? I wonder if we would account for compassion, or would our account show us having more loathing and contempt for those around us? I wonder what we would say if Jesus came to us each night. Amen.